OK, well, we've just heard from the politicians and all today's big stories. But now it's your turn. We're live for Raw Politics, Your Call.
A warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're live in the European Parliament in Brussels and we're also streaming tonight on Facebook. So hello to all our viewers there. But first, Darren, what is on the menu tonight?
Yeah, we want to hear from you, and our menu tonight is hotter than a hot June day in Paris. Let's have a look at the hot topics. Feeling the heat. Just 6 days into summer and Europe is sweltering in record-breaking temperatures. As scientists say heat waves are amplified by climate change, it's an issue expected to come up here at the G20 summit in Japan. France's Emmanuel Macron insists he won't sign the communiqué if he doesn't mention the Paris Climate Accord. But this comes after a report finds Paris is falling behind on its emission targets. And Emmanuel Macron's fuel tax U-turn amid those yellow vest protests. Meanwhile, the UK is vowing to go carbon neutral by 2050, a timeline critics say is simply too late. So we're asking, are politicians environmental hypocrites? In an act of defiance, a boat carrying migrants rescued from the Mediterranean arrives in the Italian port of Lampedusa, just weeks after Rome banned rescue vessels from its ports. The European Court of Human Rights has backed Italy, ruling that it has no obligation to allow migrants to disembark. So as the ship's captain says he's ready to go to jail over the decision, we're asking, are Mediterranean rescue groups too political? And Angela Merkel appears to shake at a ceremony today for the second time in less than 2 weeks. Concerns were first raised when the German Chancellor was seen shaking while welcoming the Ukrainian President to Berlin this month. She brushed it off as dehydration last time, and this time her spokesperson said the Chancellor is doing fine. Meanwhile, over in the US, the President undergoes an annual health check with the results made public. So we want to know, should a leader's health ever be private? Come on, Europe, have your say. Are politicians environmental hypocrites? Are Mediterranean rescue groups too political? And should a leader's health ever be private? And you know what to do? Pick up the phone. It's free. No reason not to. 00800 333 3702. Want to hear from you on those topics. You can also get in touch via email, rawpoll@euronews.com. You can get on Skype. Love to see you potentially even in your shorts this evening if you're there. And also use the hashtag #RawPolitics on social media, on the Facebook or the Twitter.
Absolutely, don't be shy. And here in the studio joining us tonight, we have Kate Bolingaro. She's an EU reporter based here in Brussels. And joining us on Raw Politics, Your Call for the very first time. So you're very welcome. We're delighted to have you. And we're also really pleased to have Stephen Wolfe, British outgoing independent MEP. He'll be packing up his office this week and leaving us, so we're glad to have you on the show tonight. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Someone here for the first time and someone here for the last time. But someone who is always here is Belle, our Euronews presenter, who's standing by in Lyon with the very latest news headlines this evening. Good evening, Belle.
Good evening, Darren, and to you, Maeve. Yes, always here, and very glad that you're talking about the heat wave, because we are feeling the heat down here in Lyon, one of the areas that is expecting the highest temperatures across France. Let's get you up to date with our top stories, though, here. A rescue ship with 42 migrants on board is sitting tight in Italian waters for a second day now in the latest standoff between Italy's hardline interior minister and humanitarian groups. The EU's called on Rome to help find a swift solution for the migrants aboard the NGO ship Sea-Watch 3, which is stranded off the coast of Lampedusa. The vessel entered Italian waters in defiance of a ban put in place by the country's populist government. At least one police officer has been killed and several people wounded in a pair of suicide bomb attacks in the city of Tunis. Authorities say the bombings targeted police officers in the Tunisian capital, although it's not yet known who's behind those explosions. And France has raised its heatwave alert from orange to red in several parts of the south for the first time since emergency measures were introduced 15 years ago. Temperatures in the affected areas are forecast to reach up to 44 degrees centigrade on Friday. Well, those are our top stories. Back to Darren and Maeve in sweltering, but perhaps not quite as hot as here, Brussels.
No, you know what, Bella? It's a very positively nice 25, 26 degrees Celsius here in Brussels today. Going to reach 34 on Saturday, where I think that's going to be the highest temperature across most of Europe this week. 44 today, apparently, in Spain. The most shocking thing is that dozens of people have already died in this heat wave, not least of all in Poland, where lots of people have taken to the waters, to lakes and rivers and got themselves into trouble. And I hear that 2 people have died in Milan of heat stroke. So it clearly is a big issue, and it is
Very
a
challenging for
big
children
issue.
and elderly people too.
Yeah, it really is. But it's a big issue because also for many people, it is connected to the issue of climate change. Many people saying that these extreme weather events are now happening more frequently than they did before, and that is because our climate globally is changing and the politicians need to do more. Not least of all people like Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who says that he will only sign the communique at the G20 in Japan this weekend if there is a commitment to all countries to the Paris Climate Accord. We all know the United States pulled out of that. Many, though, would say, well, hold on a second, Mr. Macron. Actually, you did a U-turn when it came to those diesel vehicles in France only earlier on this year, and France at the moment is falling behind its emissions targets. In fact, it's only meeting them about half of what it should. So is politicians like Emmanuel Macron and other leaders, are they environmental hypocrites? All bluster, all words, but very little action.
Indeed, he is the man, of course, who said, let's make the planet great again. That was his big, huge slogan when he was trying to get into power. But if my memory serves me right, he didn't even show up for the COP that took place in Poland. So, yeah, that is the question we're putting to you tonight. Are they environmental hypocrites? Kate, let's start with you. What do you think?
Well, definitely, I do think that we do see climate change. Since it's popular among voters, there are leaders who are willing to capitalize on that to gain more votes when they go to the polls, but they're not willing to really go forward and implement the sort of policies that we would need to see to meet all the targets that were signed in the Paris Agreement. And a lot of European leaders fall into that category. It's not only Mr. Trump in the United States who pulled out, obviously, and even in my own country in Canada, Justin Trudeau, he says we're having a climate crisis, and the next day he's approving a pipeline. So this is common around the world, and I think Europe could have a moment to actually be climate warriors, and I think they are failing on that.
What about you, Stephen? What's your thought?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, many of these world leaders are using the issue of climate as a populist agenda for themselves. The issue of climate is the new religion. And there are all sorts of extremes that go from it, from those that you see camping out in London at the moment, suggesting that we virtually end any form of diesel cars, nuclear energy overnight, with the implications to our economy, to the implications to the way that people live. And I think...
Yeah, but Stephen, isn't the point, though, I mean, unlike a religion, which is a belief system, this has got potentially very serious physical ramifications for the planet and for the generations that come after us.
Of course, and one isn't to say that we shouldn't be considerate about the planet and the levels that we see people saying that the polar ice caps will melt overnight. I've been watching this since I was a child. I remember opening up one of my my school books.
Yeah, but it's now happening, though. It is happening.
Well, we've always had some elements of climate change, and what we've got is disputes, sometimes supported by those who believe that we need vast changes done automatically, and others who are a little bit more nuanced. And whether you get into that argument, I'm not denying that we need to change our way. I'm a great believer that we have to look after our own environment. I suggested this in early politics. But what I'm looking at here is the politicians. You cannot come out and say one thing like Macron does and do absolutely nothing. That shows the hypocrisy of him, Justin Trudeau, and others like him. So either do as you say or stop playing politics just for the sake of the new religion because you think you can get votes on it. Be honest, be true, but they're not doing that at the moment.
Isn't the point, and actually Lee Morris just tweeted in saying that France, and this is another issue added on to this problem, that France imports the bulk of its power from nuclear energy stations surrounding France. It goes on to say, get green and get wave and wind turbines working for you. He says that the future can be entirely green. It's no longer merely a fantasy game. But isn't that the point, is that, certain countries like the UK also have committed themselves to being carbon neutral by 2050, but there's only for what they generate. and it's all too easy to import, in some ways, your carbon offset because you're buying goods that are made using carbon from other countries, or indeed you can route your power supplies from outside. So even making these kind of quite bold promises with grand targets are actually, the basis of them doesn't necessarily mean that your citizens or you as a country is contributing any less to global carbon emissions.
Well, I do think that there is a place, though, for everyday policies that can have an impact. If we're doing incremental policies little by little in different sectors and in different days across daily life, and different ways that we can tackle the carbon emissions in different zones, like, for example, agriculture. We don't have enough programs that are cutting back the emissions that are generated by agriculture, or awareness about how what we eat and what is on our plate impacts the climate in general. And I do think that we could be having politicians being a little less hypocritical if they were willing to actually put into place these policies that could have an overall impact, but could be smaller in terms of not as grandiose as what they've been promising us. And I do think that could give them an opportunity to meet some of the targets faster than what they've said.
And they're being watched. We've seen a massive youth movement come to the streets over the last couple of months, inspired, of course, by Greta Thunberg. She was here in Brussels. We met her when we were in the room when she told the likes of Jean-Claude Juncker, your house is on fire. Were you in the European Parliament as well?
No,
when she said that?
I didn't want to bother.
She was in Strasbourg.
Yeah,
Do you pay heed to what she says?
No, absolutely nothing, not at all. She is the type of person that has been indoctrinated by those who just have no willingness to understand the nuances. Because, quite frankly, if those people really wanted to be truthful about it, they shouldn't be hypocritical. Shouldn't be getting on the planes to come here. They shouldn't be having their iPhones. They shouldn't be eating out at the restaurants that they go to.
Let's just cut you there, because Greta Thunberg, she takes the train everywhere. She even took a train to Davos that took her 22 hours.
Look at the actresses that flew over from California to support those in the United Kingdom. What I'm saying here is there are a lot of people there who's saying, I am pro the environment, green, all these changes, yet they carry on in their normal life. If we are in such an urgency, then all of these people should stop doing almost everything they do today. But if everybody did that,
stop using your mobile phones.
Stop using your mobile phones. Stop using the television. Stop eating out in restaurants. Stop eating meat. Don't get to work. Don't buy your clothes in the shop. Don't buy anything online. Do nothing and then see whether.
Many said that there is a compromise position to be had. I think. I mean, two things. First of all, the reason Emmanuel Macron is acting, I'm sure he is potentially an environmentalist and does believe in the green agenda. But also, the Greens finished third in France in the European Parliament elections. They are now the top party in France if you're aged between 16 and 34. The exact same is true in Germany, where they finished second. So you might be a politician of the past, Stephen. I mean, not just because you're leaving the European Union and the European Parliament, but because actually, if you're a young person, this really does matter.
Yeah, it does matter, but you see, I looked at this, and particularly in terms of solar energy, but if you look at nuclear energy, you've got Nobel Peace Prize winners at the moment who are looking at the ways that they can actually use lasers to transform the longevity of actually nuclear waste, not from years, literally to hours. And if that succeeds, then we could have everything nuclear with no dangers at all and no storage. That would negate the need for any wind farm, any solar panels at all, because the energy will be there.
So they are working. So the UK in the last, I think, 2.5 months has gone without using coal. It's been run largely on wind farms and on solar energy, which were invested in, probably opposed by politicians like yourself a couple of decades ago. Now they're providing clean, cheap, renewable energy.
Well, there were different reasons why we opposed it, but certainly if you look at coal energy, that was virtually on the way down since the 1980s, since Margaret Thatcher. Don't particularly have a problem with that at all. What I am simply saying is the hypocrisy, not only of people like Macron, but also the people who have been supporting this. If you genuinely believe it, then stop doing the things you do, or become rational and reasonable and recognise that you have to have a balanced approach of how you get there. And the determined ideas that they have at the moment are not being balanced.
It's not a debate that's going to end. Anyway, Maeve.
Yeah, well, we have a poll. We've been asking people on Twitter what do they think about this topic, whether or not they think politicians are environmental hypocrites. And it seems that the majority of you think so. 86% said yes.
Well, all I would say is politicians potentially are as being as hypocritical as people out there who claim they care about the environment, and I do somewhat agree with Stephen, aren't necessarily willing to give up their holidays on the planes or indeed their beef in restaurants. But anyway, if you've got a view on that, pick up the phone, 00800 333 700 2. Are politicians environmental hypocrites? Are you an environmental hypocrite? We want to hear from you. Also, should a leader's health ever be private? And after the break, we're taking your calls on this. Are Mediterranean rescue groups too political? Join us in a minute or so.
Yeah, we'll speak to Eddie from London in a minute. See you after this very short break.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. Your call, Albert, emailing in saying he's surprised that Euronews was making such a big deal that in parts of Germany there were water restrictions. He says he lives in Frankfurt and they have had these restrictions for decades. That is not very rare during dry periods, often throughout the year. Well, Albert, if you say that so it is. But I think it is a pretty extreme weather situation when we've got record temperatures in many parts of Europe for the month of June. Anyway, let's park that for a second. Let's move on to migrants in the Mediterranean. Yet again, there have been migrants rescued in the Meds in the last couple of weeks, trying to, with those rescue boats, dock in Italy, Lampedusa, which has had a big issue with migration over the last couple of years. The European Court of Human Rights has said that Italy is right to turn these boats away if they don't want the migrants in Italy. But the ship's captain is saying he is ready to go to jail to ensure that I think it's 42 people on board do manage to actually, after 2 weeks at sea, get on dry land. Let's bring in Eddie from London, who's on the phone. Eddie, what do you think? Do you think that these rescue boats in the Mediterranean have become too political or not?
Yes, indeed. Thank you for having me. In my view, they have become very political. They have always been political. Now, my reason for saying this is if you keep encouraging, offering transport sailing across the Mediterranean, you are encouraging more people to be coming. When will it stop? According to Geneva Convention 1951, migration to seek economic help does not constitute any right for asylum. So what I think should be done is for Europe to facilitate a clearing center in North Africa or anywhere in the region in order to screen people who have humanitarian needs to help them. Those that have economic ambition, they consider how many that could be assisted to save the life of thousands of Africans that have been dying on the Mediterranean. That's point one. Point two, Italy has been suffering this for the past many years, and the other European countries, for good reasons best known to them, are not in a position to share in the liability. Italy has its own economic problem and nearing bankruptcy. How could they then support this large influx when they could not support their own citizens satisfactorily?
Because, Eddie, people would say...
And the other point is this,
Eddie,
it has colonial legacy.
No, I'm just going to say, Eddie, many people would say the reason that Italy should do it is because it's the right thing to do, that these are people, not just Africans and economic migrants, but they're also people fleeing wars in places like Syria still, and conflict in places like Afghanistan, and they're desperately trying to get to Europe so they can be safe.
This market for Africans to sell their products in Africa to create economic opportunities so that they can stay at home. If you help a man with a fish, he will only feed himself and his family for a day. But if you provide them the means of catching their own fish, they will feed their family for a lifetime. Okay. That's my view.
Okay.
Okay, Eddie. Thanks for calling us. Stay with us there. We'll get some reactions from Stephen.
I think Eddie was making the important statement that people like Salvini would actually state. That is that when you're looking at these people coming across on the boats, we talked about it, 42, that's 175,000 euros in the pockets of the people traffickers for those 42 people who are on the boats. Gangsters who are helping people trafficking, supplying drugs and women in prostitution all through Italy are gaining because of what this ship captain is doing. By bringing them in, he's allowing that movement and that cash to come in.
So where should they go?
Irrespective of the answer.
Remain in detention camps in Libya, where they are exposed to physical and sexual abuse, where they live in the most horrendous... And these are people like... There are villages in Syria today still being bombed by Russia and the Syrian regime. and often these are people literally fleeing for their lives.
And we've argued for quite some time, and it's probably, I'm not a big fan of David Cameron, but one of the things that I did support him was that there are non-governmental organisations who have funded to the tune, and one of my reports shows that the EU spends since 2007 on average 50 billion euros a year on migrant-related issues and funding, which includes a huge number of non-governmental organisations that work in these regions. And we should have camps, whether it's the ones that were doing deals where we've given billions to Turkey to allow those Syrians to stay there, to work with an organised force in Libya where we can check whether they are genuine asylum seekers, not economic migrants, and if they are, then find an appropriate route in through the asylum process. There are ways of doing it, but this captain, by breaking the law, is just being too political deliberately.
Let's get the view from Kate. Now, just to verify, this captain, she's actually female. She is a German lady. Do you think she did the right thing?
Well, I do think that there is a big humanitarian aspect to this. I mean, these are human lives. 2 weeks at sea is a long time. And it's a shame for European countries that they can't even get their act together enough to say, OK, we have 42 people, 2 weeks at sea. Can we please find somebody to take them if Italy is not going to take them? So I do understand why she decided to do it. I mean,
Salvini argues the Dutch should take them because it's a Dutch vessel.
Or the Dutch flag,
or the Germans. But they say no.
Let's bring in Paul from Poland, who's on the line. Good evening, Paul. Do you think that the Mediterranean rescue groups are being too political?
Well, I don't really understand the question. I think they've been intensely political from the beginning. This has been going on since 2015, hasn't it? And it's contributed. Sorry.
No, carry on. Sorry.
I was going to say it's contributed to the rise in nationalism and right-wing politics in Europe. Matteo Salvini came to power as a nationalist leader, and to be frank, I do have some sympathy with him. Italy seems to be suffering the bulk of this problem, this issue.
Do you not think that the people who are in charge of these boats are trying to do essentially the right thing? They're trying to save people's lives. I mean, forget about people not being able to, live in a house because they haven't, there's too many migrants and the population's too high, or they can't get a job. Like, these people on these boats are trying to save people's lives.
Darren, you're expanding the issue, and if you're going to expand it, you can't just stop there. In Europe, people are feeling an incredible pressure on their identities, and I think what they're feeling quite strongly is fear for a world that they see as changing. So, of course, I've got sympathy for these people, but they're coming here because of what's going on in the Middle East.
Of which we have played a part potentially. Okay, then, Paul, I'll give you. Let me put it this way: what would your solution be? Because clearly, people are not going to stop coming to Europe. They are going to continue coming to Europe. They are going to cross the Mediterranean. What's your solution?
Yeah. I don't know, mate. I tell you, this is something that I think is of huge historic significance. It's going to change European demographics. It was predicted years ago by some academic who said that there was going to be a massive change of migration flow from east to west to south to north. And I think Europe is struggling with it. I'd like to take exception with the North American contributor there is saying again, as she said a moment ago, that Europe has failed and is failing with this issue. Speaking from Canada, I don't think, I would like to pull her up on being able to say things like that. I think the Americans have a similar attitude until they started to have this experience of migrants moving from South America.
Okay.
It is a big issue. I couldn't suggest anything.
Okay, Paul, thank you. We appreciate your call. Thank you. We'll allow you to respond. You don't understand migration in Canada?
Well, I do think Canada...
Even though
You
you're a
remember
country...
Justin Trudeau, though, welcoming people in.
Yes, I actually think
Also,
that...
isn't Canada a country of migrants?
I think Canada is honestly the best example in the world about migration, and I do think that making migration, and we do have controls for migration, but we did also accept 25,000 Syrian refugees when Justin Trudeau promised to bring them, and he did, and they were doing it by private sponsorship and other deals. And I do think that I think that Canada is actually a way that could be looked for from Europe, is that you can implement migration. We have 1 million people that come to Canada on almost an annual basis. We have a lot of people coming because we really need the migrants ourselves.
But hold on a second. But yeah, you need the migrants, but you're not like Italy. You have not got tens of thousands of people on boats turning up.
That's right.
Every single month in Canada.
No, of
You
course not.
You can control it.
But we're in a geographically very isolated situation.
So I think Paul's point was, as a Canadian, you can't really understand the Italians, the pressure that they're under, or indeed the Greeks.
And the reason for that, of course, is the lack of political will on behalf of the EU member states to reform the Dublin regulation. There's been many attempts to do so right here in the Parliament as well, which you probably know.
Yes,
Cecilia
absolutely.
Wikström, she put the papers on the table, she worked on them for months, she sent them over and back to the Commission, and then it got to council level and the EU member states just threw them in the bin.
OK, well, the poll that we've asked you, are the Mediterranean rescue groups too political? 55% saying yes, 45% saying no. So most people thinking that. We're going to stay with this subject because the call's coming in, and we'll be back in just a minute or two. Stay tuned.
See you in a minute. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching Raw Politics, your call. So thank you for joining us. And hello to all our Facebook viewers as well. Keep those comments coming in and keep those calls as well. Our lines will be open for about 15 minutes. And we've got Anne on the line now from Norfolk, who's going to speak about that topic of migration. Anne, can you hear us?
By all means. Good evening, everybody. It's a law of the sea. I believe it's a Dutch ship with a Dutch captain. So therefore, he should take them to Holland.
So it's actually a German? She's actually German, Carol?
Hello?
Yeah.
If we pick up anybody, an English ship picks up anybody on the high seas, they bring them to England. They don't take them to the first port of call.
OK, so Anne, how would you...
And that particular...
Let me put it this way then. How would you like if thousands, and I'm sure there would be thousands of English people who would happily take boats to the Mediterranean and sail straight for England, if that's the law of the sea, I'm sure you would abide by that and have no problem with it.
From France, they are coming over in small vessels. They're still in the boats. They're still in boats from France, and they're coming across the channel.
I mean, we have to say this. It's a dozens, maybe into the hundreds. You seem to have sympathy for the Italians, that they should have the right to turn these boats away.
Well, just look at Italy. I think they owe €1 trillion, or a fantastic amount of money.
They have a mountain of debt.
And they are also looking after thousands of migrants. I don't think that is fair.
So Anne, just let me because I put this question to Paul just before the break. I mean, people aren't going to stop coming to Europe. That's always going to happen, particularly when there's conflicts sometimes that we have caused. What would you do? What's your solution?
Well, I would send out certain people to these countries and have them vetted in their own countries. It's as easy as that.
But the wars...
Not people just looking for an easy life.
And these are war zones. These are war zones. People are coming from Syria where people are being bombed to death. We can't do that.
Yes, but in the Second World War, we had loads of people coming to England. We didn't turn any of them away.
But now you are.
We are just a little island here. If you look at the whole of England, it's 1% of land. If you look at Italy and France and all the rest of it, they've got loads of land. We haven't.
So the UK is just a little island. What does that make Ireland then? A tiny little island.
Okay.
And thank you so much. It's
for your
been
call.
great having your call. And actually what Anne was saying there, it's very unfair that Italy has been bearing the brunt of this situation for the last couple of years, and of course Greece. But this is down to, again, the lack of solidarity on EU level.
And geography.
Well, clearly geography, but as well.
On a personal level, they've been spending from their own national income somewhere between the region of 4 to 5 billion euros a year, in addition to the billions that are being given to them by the European Union versus various projects. So you can understand the financial implications for them taking that weight on. But you made a point, Darren, about the people leaving the war zones. They have to move somewhere. They have to travel through certain areas to be able to get down to Libya or move up through Turkey. So they've clearly moved out of the war zone area into an area where they could be checked if you followed one of the strategies that I would suggest. And secondly, there is a very important point. It doesn't matter whether the captain is a man or a woman or she's German. German in this case it might be because of the law of the sea. But what is it that Germany and Holland have decided to decline access to this boat? Why have they said it should go back to Italy? And that's why it makes it political. The politicisation of this is by the captain to say, I'm taking it to Italy to score points against Salvini. If she really wanted to be problematical, stick it outside and see what Rutte would do in Holland, because that's where the boat is, or see what she'd do with Germany. Germany took on over 1 million. So what's wrong this time? That's why it's essentially political.
Nico is saying no, Europe should accept any more refugees, since Angela Merkel's open border policy created a huge problem to Italy and Greece. Even with agreements that it's a European country taking its share of the burden has done it. So we have thousands of stranded people in camps. And that is the point, is that there is no agreement across Europe. Is there any potential that that is going to change?
No, I don't think so. Not with the current national governments. I mean, and honestly, we look at we had the caller talking about identity. All of this really comes down to identity politics. Identity in Europe is political. And I think that actually by saying that European identity is under threat is a farce, because Europe is much more diverse and much more pluralistic, with a lot more identities and in different countries and different cross sections of society than we give it credit for. And I mean, perhaps it's different in a country like Poland, which is way more homogenous than a country like France, for example. However, if you're going to belong to the European Union, you need to also welcome diversity and welcome plurality.
But isn't the truth, like, kind of cutting to the chase, is essentially people do not want Muslims in Europe?
That's essentially basically what, honestly, it is.
Actually, there's a hell of a lot of these people actually who are coming over who are Christians, as not just Muslims. But don't you think it's also acceptable for people to say that they want to retain the identity of their country, their historical elements, their cultural aspects, and that if you do bring in different cultures that are not integrating, which is half the issues which you find in France, which you're finding in Britain, which are now very, very clearly in Germany, that you don't get the integration where they're not accepting the German way of doing things. They want to bring in their own ways. Do you not think that those people living in those communities have a point?
Definitely, there should be some integration involved in this. It's obviously not just like open doors and then here you go, come in. There's also about society, but I think it's wrong to think that culture is stagnant. Culture is always changing. Culture is always moving. When we're talking about, for example, gay rights and the right to get married, or abortion rights, all of those have changed, and the mentalities towards that have changed. And I think that culture and tradition and history can be imbued in these children that are going to be raised here, and the fact that there can be discussions about what culture is and culture will be in the future.
Indeed, I was in Malaga at the weekend, which of course for hundreds and hundreds of years was a Moorish Muslim part of the world, with mosques until Christian Crusaders took it over. So Europe has got the ability to change. But anyway, we're going to pause on that note because Stephen's desperate to get in, and we're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to carry on this discussion about, are politicians environmental hypocrites? Should a leader's health ever be private, given what's happened to Angela Merkel in the last couple of weeks? And are Mediterranean rescue groups too political? I think, where's the clock? We've got about 7 minutes left. Join us in 1 or 2 minutes after the break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Your call tonight, the programme. As always, it's up to you to decide what you want to talk about. And tonight it's very much this issue of migrants in the Mediterranean, about Italy's decision to block this Dutch boat with a German captain from landing in Lampedusa. We're asking, are Mediterranean rescue groups too political? And I think we've got David on the line from London. Good evening, David. What's your thought? Too political or not?
Yes, I think it is too political. What I'm about to say may be unpalatable, but I do believe that we are having no leadership whatsoever in any way from any of the countries and the groups. We need hard answers. And what I mean by hard answers are, when you have a huge problem, which you have got, you need leadership. Leadership from all countries, not just one, leadership from all countries. I'm in my 70s. I'm a child of the Marshall Plan. I was born in 1944. The Americans arrived in Europe. We were in chaos. Europe is now currently in chaos. If we allow an unacceptable amount of migrants, and I do feel sorry for the migrants. I look at what Turkey's done. It's a shining example of what you can do. But that's one country on its own. We need leadership. We need NATO, whatever organisations we can get to go back into Libya, Africa, those countries. Now, we're not talking about colonialism. What we're talking about is order. Not order in a sense of, hierarchical Nazi order, an order where we can go in. It will be hard, politically, it will be fireworks, but we need to go into these countries, and they do need to be, how can I put it, they need to be, if you like, taken over, not a colonialism in any way, not a colonialism.
But essentially what you're saying, I think, it needs to be sorted at the source rather than when migrants get
But
to
is there a huge problem? I mean, I remember 2015, that was a huge problem. Now it's 2019.
Well,
there's a perception that there's a huge problem, but is there really, Kate?
I think it's kind of blown out of proportion at this point. I do think Europe's numbers have been going down. I checked the International Organization of Migration's latest results, latest indicators on the Mediterranean earlier before we started our discussion, and it really looks like the numbers are continuing to drop. I mean, 2015, 2016, we saw a huge wave of people, but it's become also, I think, a sort of a passion project, we could say, for populist politics. We just had the European elections. There's a race for the top commission, top of jobs. I think that it's becoming a popular issue to say, we're going to solve the migration crisis.
Well, we're not going to solve it, unfortunately, on this programme, but we're going to leave it there on that issue and have tonight's last word. And the last word comes from Holly Brockwell, and it is on Angela Merkel seen shaking for a second time in just over a week. She says, "Dear Lord, leave her alone. If she has a health issue she wants to talk about, she will talk about it. She doesn't owe us an explanation." Very quickly, guys, because we really have got very little time. Does she owe us an explanation?
No, she doesn't.
To a certain extent, perhaps, because look at Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and how much speculation is caused by him not being always so forthcoming about his own illnesses. Yeah,
I reckon it could potentially be politically damaging, simply because it has happened for a second time with very little explanation. But there we go. The debate will carry on online. Continue to use the hashtag #RawPolitics. We still want to hear your views, but that is it for this evening.
It is indeed, and Angela Merkel will probably soldier on, and she's on her way to Japan. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to Stephen. Thanks to Kate. We'll see you next week. We'll be in Strasbourg for Raw Politics. Your call.
Good night. Bye-bye.